Growing up in a rough part of California, my childhood was anything but ordinary. Our neighborhood, tucked away on the fringes of Los Angeles, was notoriously known for being a Crip stronghold, a detail that defined much of our day-to-day lives. Despite the undercurrent of danger that ran through our streets, life for me and my best friend, Stevie D, was about making the most of our youth. Stevie lived just 2 doors down from me, and from the moment we met, we were inseparable. We did everything together, from riding our bikes through the narrow, graffiti-laden alleys to marathon video game sessions that lasted well into the night. We were just regular kids trying to carve out a slice of normalcy in a world that often felt governed by unspoken rules and the ever-present hum of street life. It was the summer of our 12th year when our adventures took a turn toward the unforgettable. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow that softened the hard edges of our neighborhood. That evening, fueled by a mix of youthful curiosity and the thrill of the unknown, we decided to explore a local legend, the abandoned house at the end of our block. This house had stood empty for as long as anyone could remember. Its dilapidated facade and boarded-up windows gave it a forlorn appearance, making it the subject of numerous ghost stories and dares among the local kids. No one really knew why it had been left to decay, only that it seemed to repel potential buyers and renters alike, as if it were cursed. As we approached the house on our bikes, the air grew inexplicably colder, and the usual sounds of the neighborhood seemed to fade away, swallowed by the ominous silence that surrounded the property. Stevie, always the braver one, pointed toward one of the shadow-filled windows. "Look," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the distance. I edged my bike closer, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to see what had caught his attention. Through the grimy window, I saw it, a face, obscured partially by tattered curtains, peering out into the fading light. My breath caught in my throat. "There's someone in there," I muttered, more to myself than to Stevie. We exchanged a look, a mix of fear and fascination. As we stared, the face remained eerily motionless, its eyes seeming to fix on a point far beyond us. Driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, we dismounted our bikes and tiptoed up the driveway, our steps hesitant. The closer we got, the clearer it became that something was off. The face was too still, too pale. A prank, perhaps? A Halloween decoration left forgotten in the window? That had to be it, we reasoned. Someone must have broken in and set up a fake head to scare off curious trespassers, or maybe just for a laugh. Buoyed by this thought and our own budding courage, we decided to investigate further. We stashed our bikes behind a bush, thick with overgrowth from years of neglect, and made our way to the back of the house. To our surprise, the back door wasn't just unlocked. It was slightly ajar, as if inviting us, or anyone, inside. The inside of the house was cloaked in shadows, the last slivers of daylight creeping in through cracks in the boarded-up windows. We moved slowly, our eyes adjusting to the dim interior, our ears picking up the faint, musty scent that hung in the air. The living room, where the window and the mysterious head were located, was our first stop. As we entered, a foul smell assaulted our senses, strong enough to make us gag. The excitement of our adventure was quickly giving way to a growing sense of unease. Stevie, with a cautious hand, reached for the head on the windowsill. The second he touched it, he recoiled, dropping it with a shout. It wasn't the weight that startled him, nor the feel of it. It was the texture, like skin, too much like skin, and then the unmistakable sight of dark liquid spilling out onto the floorboards. Blood. It was real blood, pooling around a severed human head. The realization hit us like a freight train. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a decoration. It was real. A real head. A real person. Panic surged through our veins as we heard a noise above us. The unmistakable sound of someone moving in the heavy silence of the house. Stevie and I didn't hesitate. We ran, stumbling over our own feet, propelled by sheer terror back through the house and out the door we'd come in. We didn't stop running until we were back on our bikes, pedaling as fast as our legs could carry us away from that house, away from the nightmare we'd stumbled upon. Ting and shaking, Stevie and I didn't dare slow down until we were several blocks away from that horrid house. Only when we reached the familiar, graffiti-tagged walls of the corner store did we finally stop, our bikes clattering to the ground as we collapsed against the cool metal of the store's shuttered doors. The fading light seemed to retreat faster now, as if to pull us back into the darkness we had just escaped. Our hearts pounded not just from the exertion, but from a fear that clung to us, thick and unyielding. We need to tell someone, I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper, my thoughts swirling chaotically. Stevie nodded, his face pale under the streetlights, his usual mischievous spark drowned out by the sheer terror of our discovery. Yeah, but who? Who's gonna believe us? His voice broke with the weight of what we'd seen. It wasn't just the head, the undeniable reality of a life violently ended. It was the implication of who might have left it there, and why. Our neighborhood, controlled by the pervasive influence of the Crips, had seen its share of violence and threats. Messages were sent in many forms, sometimes a spray-painted tag, sometimes something much worse. But this was beyond anything we had ever heard of or imagined. We knew then that we had to be careful about how we proceeded. Going directly to the police felt fraught with its own dangers, given the complex relationship between the officers and our community. Instead, we decided to go to Mr. Jacobs, an old school teacher who had taught us both and lived a few doors down from Stevie. He was one of the few adults we trusted implicitly. Mr. Jacobs answered his door with a puzzled frown that deepened as he took in our disheveled appearances and frantic expressions. "Boys, what on earth happened?" he asked, ushering us inside with a wary glance down the street. In his living room, under the soft glow of a table lamp, we spilled out our story, tripping over our words, the horrific images replaying in our minds as we spoke. Mr. Jacobs listened, his expression turning graver by the moment. When we finished, he was silent for a long beat, his hand covering his mouth as he thought. "This is serious, very serious," he finally said, his voice steady. "I'll make a call to an old friend at the police department. Someone discreet, someone who can handle this properly. You did the right thing coming here." True to his word, Mr. Jacobs made the call, speaking in low, urgent tones while we sat, numb and still, trying to process our spiraling thoughts. Within an hour, a plainclothes detective arrived, his badge shown quickly before he sat down to hear our story again. He took meticulous notes, asked pointed questions, and assured us that we would be kept out of the official narratives for our safety. The days that followed were tense. The news of the discovery broke, though our names were never mentioned. We learned that the head was indeed that of a man recently gone missing, suspected to be entangled somehow with the local gang activities. The police never publicly confirmed the connection to the Crips, but on the street, the rumors swirled with certainty. A message had been sent, a gruesome marker of territory and power. Stevie and I talked often about that night, about how narrowly we had escaped potentially walking into a far more dangerous situation. Our foray into mischief had brought us face to face with the darkest realities of our neighborhood, and the weight of that stayed with us. We became more cautious, our adventures tempered with a new awareness of the shadows that lurked just out of sight. As we grew older, the incident became a stark reminder of the choices we faced. For me, it instilled a resolve to find a path out of the cycle of violence and despair that seemed to claim so many around us. I focused on school, on the possibilities that lay beyond the confines of our troubled neighborhood. Years later, as I prepare to leave for college, that night remains a defining moment in my life. It's a reminder of where I come from, of the realities that shape the lives of those around me, and of the resilience needed to change one's course. It's a story I carry with me, a somber tale of survival and awakening in a world that often offers little of either. It was Christmas Eve, and while most people were home with their families, warm and festive, I was gearing up for the overnight shift at the local gas station. At 20, standing 5 feet 6 inches and weighing in somewhere around average for my height, I wasn't particularly intimidating, which always made working these late hours a bit unnerving. Being the only employee during these shifts added an extra layer of isolation to my job. The shift started at 11 p.m. and would stretch until 7 a.m. Christmas morning. The store was quiet, a stark contrast to the bustle of the last-minute shoppers I had seen earlier in the day. It was a typical night, devoid of customers, leaving me to my routine of cleaning and restocking with only the soft hum of the refrigerators for company. By midnight, my tasks were nearly complete, and I decided to take a break. I grabbed a quick bite from my packed dinner and stepped outside for a smoke, a small reprieve in the chilly air that always helped to clear my head. The parking lot was empty, the usual glow of headlights and sounds of travelers absent on this holiday night. The silence was broken only by the occasional distant laughter or shout carried by the wind from nearby homes celebrating the holiday. As I stood there, enjoying the calm, I heard the crunch of gravel underfoot, a sound that was usually innocuous, signaling a customer or a passerby. But tonight, it seemed to echo ominously through the empty lot. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the figure approaching from the direction of the road. It was a man, about 5 feet 9 inches and thin, dressed in a dark hoodie and jeans. He carried a gift bag, an odd accessory for someone walking into a gas station late at night. As he came closer, the dim light from the station's signage revealed something startling. He was bleeding from a wound on his forehead. "Are you okay? Do you need any help?" I called out as he approached, my voice steady despite the anxiety that tingled up my spine. It struck me as strange, not just the injury but the way he carried himself, with a kind of desperate intensity. He stopped a few feet away, and I noticed the bag was empty. My first red flag that this wasn't just a normal customer with a simple accident. The man locked eyes with me, his gaze hollow, and said, "You want to help? Then don't call the fucking cops." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "There's a first aid kit inside. I can help you clean up that cut," I offered, hoping to keep the situation calm. I knew it was risky, but my instinct was to offer aid, even though every alarm bell in my head was ringing. We entered the store, and I led him to the counter where the first aid kit was stashed. I handed him antiseptic wipes and some gauze, watching cautiously as he dabbed at the blood on his forehead. He then muttered something about needing to use the restroom and reminded me again, "No cops?" Once he disappeared into the bathroom, the severity of the situation started to sink in. I wrestled with my conscience and fear. If he didn't come out soon, I would have to call the police, regardless of his warning. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. He didn't reemerge. My decision was made. I slipped outside, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was a small comfort as I explained the situation. Stay out of the store and find somewhere safe to wait until officers arrive, she instructed. I positioned myself at the side of the building where I could see the bathroom exit but remain hidden. The wait was excruciating, my heart pounding against my chest, my breath visible in the cold night air. The police arrived quietly, their patrol car lights off to avoid alarming the man inside. I pointed them to the bathroom, and just as they reached the door, it swung open. The man lunged at them with something metallic glinting in his hand, a knife. The officers tackled him before he could attack, the knife clattering to the ground. They handcuffed him and led him out of the store. As he passed by me, guarded by the officers, he spat out a chilling promise. "You're lucky they got here when they did. I'll see you again soon." Shaken, I gave my statement to the police, recounting the events leading up to the arrest. But one question lingered in my mind, one I almost dreaded to ask. What was he doing in the bathroom? I inquired. The officer's response was grim. "It's good you called when you did. He had used heroin in there, and he was preparing to come out with that knife. Planned to rob you. Maybe worse," he explained. The realization that I had narrowly escaped a potentially fatal encounter chilled me to the bone. The man had been driven by desperation, fueled by drug addiction and debt, and had seen me as nothing more than an obstacle to his next fix. As I processed the night's events, the joy of the holiday season was overshadowed by a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the close call I had just survived. Officers took the man away, and the store once again fell silent, the lingering adrenaline making the quiet feel all the more profound. I sat down behind the counter, the cold tile against my back feeling grounding after the chaos. The usual hum of the refrigerators and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead now seemed deafening. My hands were still shaking, and as the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had just transpired began to fully sink in. I replayed the night's events over in my mind, each decision, each moment that led up to the police arriving. Had I not trusted my instincts to call the authorities when I did, the situation could have ended very differently. The officer's words echoed in my head, a haunting reminder of the danger I had narrowly escaped. The thought of what the man intended to do with the knife, fueled by desperation and drugs, was terrifying. He wasn't just a desperate person in need of help. He was a threat, ready to harm for his gain. As the night turned into early morning, the police finished their investigation at the scene and allowed me to close up the shop. The drive home was automatic, my mind still processing. Once home, the stillness of the night weighed heavily. The Christmas lights twinkling in the neighborhood felt disconnected from the darkness I felt inside. Sleep was elusive that night. Every sound was a reminder of the store's doors swinging open, of the man's hollow, desperate eyes. I knew then that the experience would stay with me, a stark contrast to the festive joy typically felt during the season. Christmas Day passed in a blur, my family's celebration muted by my distraction and quiet anxiety. In the days that followed, I struggled with a mix of emotions. There was relief that I was unharmed, guilt for feeling traumatized when physically I was fine, and a pervasive fear that lingered every time I thought about returning to work. The man's parting words, a threat veiled as a promise, haunted me. I knew it was unlikely he would be released soon, but the fear wasn't rational. It clung to the shadows, to the moments just before sleep when the mind wanders through the worst possibilities.